toward the One, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of Guidance. Welcome to this video in my series on the practices of Universal Sufism. And in this particular video, I'm going to look very briefly at some of the breathing exercises that you will often find among Universal Sufis. And it's important to keep in mind that two things. Number one, that there are literally thousands of different breathing exercises and variations of these exercises. And number two, that the breathing exercises are part of the larger arsenal, if you will, of practices that Sufis utilize in order to gain insight, in order to achieve various states of consciousness, and in order to heal and serve others, as well as just simply rest in the spirit of the divine. And to remind you, you have zikr, which is the practice of remembrance, and zikr often is part of a breathing exercise. It is an additional component to a breathing exercise. And then you have meditation, and then you have contemplation. So this video is specifically dealing with the breathing exercise portion of this. So what I'm going to do is read a very brief excerpt from a lecture that Hazrat Nayak Khan gave at the beginning of the 20th century. And his views on breathing essentially reflect a traditional view of Sufi breathing practices. So he doesn't really differ that much from what traditional Sufi teaching would have given him about breathing exercises generally. And then I will introduce you to a couple of breathing exercises that were part of my early instruction, and then talk a little bit about the application of some of these practices, as well as some of the sources that you can consult if you're interested in further developing any facility with these practices, as well as briefly touch on some of the more rhythmic or active breathing exercises. And I'll do that towards the end of the video. Now, this passage of Hazrat Nayak Khan is taken from a collection that was put together after his passing called Mental Purification and Healing. And most of these lectures very specifically deal with the practices of zikr and breathing and concentration meditation. In fact, this book has some of the more esoteric teachings in it that were available to the public at large. And it's also one of the more traditional of his volumes. In other words, it has more traditional teachings in it. But as he puts it, when we look at life more keenly, we see it as the same. Our worry about things seems to be our nature, our character. We cannot help it. It becomes such a part of our nature to worry that if we had no worry, we would doubt if we were really living. Mystics, therefore, for thousands of years have practiced control of the breath, its balance, its rhythm, the expanding, lengthening, broadening, and centralizing of the breath. By this great phenomena have been accomplished. All the Sufis in Persia, in Egypt, and India have been great masters of breathing. And there are some masters who are conscious of their spiritual realization with every breath they inhale and exhale. With every breath comes the consciousness of their plane of realization. For a person who really knows how to work with breath, if he is not lazy, there is nothing he cannot accomplish. He cannot say of anything that it is impossible. Only it requires work. It is not only a matter of knowing the theory, but it requires the understanding of it. That is why the adepts, the mystics, do not consider breathing only as a science or as an exercise. They consider it as the most sacred thing, as sacred as religion. And in order to accomplish this breathing, a discipline is given by a teacher. So what you see before you here is one of the very first breathing exercises that I was given by a teacher many, many years ago, my first Sufi teacher. And she gave this exercise to me because I had a problem with anxiety. And this is an exercise that is intended to help with things like that, because what it does is it teaches you control of the breath. It teaches you not only control of the breath, but control of the diaphragm, which is part of what will help you control your breath, obviously. And when I was first taught this, I was simply taught the pattern. And it's important to pay attention to how this is done. The inhalations are always done through the nose, so you inhale through the nose, the exhalations through the mouth, and do that to the best of your ability. Obviously, if you have sinus issues, you can do both through the mouth, but if you can breathe through your nose, because that helps to sort of slow your breathing down a little bit, it's recommended. So the way the pattern works is as indicated here. You first begin by breathing in through your nose and breathing out through your mouth 5 times. And you just do this, you count in 5 times, count out 5 times. And the count is to be a normal count, not real fast, not real slow, just, trying to emulate your own breath, your own steady breath. And then in the next set, you breathe into the count of 5, and you breathe out to the count of 10, and you do that 4 times. And in the next set, you breathe into the count of 5, and you breathe out to the count of 15, and you do that 3 times. And you'll notice, in this instance, what you're doing is you're stretching the exhalation. You're stretching it. And by the time you get to 20 or 25, it's actually kind of hard to do if you've never done this before. When you get to the last part of this first set, then you reverse the process so that whereas you breathed out to the count of 25 at the very end, then for the next portion, you breathe in to the count of 25 and you breathe out to the count of 5. So you're stretching your inhalations. And I can tell you that this is actually pretty difficult if you've never done this before. And you do that once, and then you breathe into the count of 20 and out to the count of 5, 2 times, and following the pattern there. Now, once you get this pattern down, and it took me a couple weeks really to master it when I first started. Once you get this pattern down, then you add a zikr to it. You add a wazifa, you add a name of God. So the simplest is to add Allah. So you breathe in to the name of Allah, to the count of 5, and then you breathe out. Or if you want to make it even easier, you take Allah, which has 2 syllables, and you breathe in, Ah, to the count of 5, and then you breathe out, La. So you're stretching out the name of Allah. It's the simplest way to do it. You can also do this with much more complex wazifas, as they are called. So this is an introductory breathing exercise, and what I would recommend you do is you stop the recording and give it a try. Now, this is a much more complex practice. These are called the element breaths. And when you read this, it'll say in the same pattern as the purification breaths. Don't worry about that right now. The reason that I'm using the element breaths is that if you look up Sufi breathing practices, you will come across, on several websites, you will come across a different version of this. And the version that is current on the internet is not the original version. It is a version that was developed later on in certain universal Sufi circles, because this particular original pattern is much more difficult, and it requires a much greater refinement of imagination. But let me just show you the very first thing. First of all, each element has its own breathing pattern. So with earth, you breathe in and out through the nose. With water, you breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. With fire, you breathe in through the mouth and out through the nose. And with air, you breathe in and out through the mouth. And then there's also ether and a couple of other traditional breaths. But when you're breathing, inhaling and exhaling, you also imagine or image certain things. So that, for example, when you're breathing in through the nose and out through the nose, when you're doing the earth breath, you envision the color yellow right in front of the tip of your nose. And there's actually a very specific reason for this, which you don't figure out until you've learned how to do this. And then with water, you breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, and you envision the color green at the top of the bridge of the nose, where it goes right into the front of your face. And what I would suggest you do is stop the video and actually read through these and attempt to do them. The main elements of this breathing exercise were actually transmitted directly to me and several other people from Hidayat Khan, who was Hazrat Nayak Khan's youngest son. And these are the element breaths as he observed and listened to his father, directly transmitting these to his mother in a very, very uniquely intimate moment of transmission. And so he considered these to be sort of the most esoteric version of this particular breathing exercise. And it is a little advanced, I'll be the first to say, but if you can do this and you do it the way it's outlined, you will discover what the colors are for and why they're positioned in the places that they are positioned. So I would encourage you to just try this. And this is a practice that is based on Hindu pranayama practices. So this is an aspect of breathing exercises that Sufis obviously got from Hindu sources. There are other breathing practices where you actually move your head, and I've talked a little bit about this in Zikr, but these practices involve breathing while you're moving your head up and down or from side to side in different patterns. So if you consult the Zikr video, it will show you what some of these movement patterns are, and then what you do with those patterns is that you add breathing to them as you are moving up and down. There is also a set of breathing practices that are called the Latif breathing practices, which are not taught. You cannot actually find these published anywhere. I've not yet been able to find them published anywhere. They are esoteric practices, and they involve breathing into different parts of the body, using light and wazifa and movement in order to do this. And these are practices that are often connected to healing practices, whether they be mental healing practices, exorcism practices, or physical healing practices. So they really aren't suitable for an introduction here, but I did want to mention them. I have been given some of these practices and can teach them personally. And if you're interested in looking further into some of these breathing practices, these are two books that I can recommend. Sufi Meditation and Contemplation is a compendium of both breathing and zikr practices, and some meditation practices as well. And then the Book of Sufi Healing is the only place where I have found some reference to Latif practices, although they are not explicated in this book. There are some issues with this book in terms of the personality of the individual writing it, but the material in the book itself is quite good, and I have actually received personal instruction from him. So I recommend it as well. And this concludes our brief introduction to Sufi breathing practices.